Socratic discourse, where we follow the argument wherever it leads. So today I'm with my friend again, David Suarez. We did a video with him last time, and he's back again to do another episode with him. So welcome, Dev. Please say hi to us and tell us how things have been from the last time we had our recording.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And it's wonderful to see you and to see everybody again. It was great to have a chance to talk a little bit about Islam last time and also some of the issues with atheism on the side. But I'm always excited to be able to talk with a brother or sister in Christ about how good God is and how true Christ is.
Yeah. Great. So welcome. Today we will be talking about Dev's book. He has written a very good book called The Death of Allah.
That's right. There you go. That's
Death
right.
of Allah. That is the book. And I think, I think I will title the video "The Death of Allah."
Nice. That's great. Yeah. One of the professors from our seminary, Dr.
Yeah,
Mauser, said, that's a pretty strong title. And I'm like, well, it's a pretty strong argument, a set of arguments.
absolutely. So that is the book that we'll be talking about. We see some of the why you wrote the book and what are some of the main
Mhm.
arguments that you put forth in the book. But before we get to that, I want us to do something. This was sort of unplanned for, but it is good that we do this. I did a video like 2 or 3 days ago on atheism, and it has uh, caused a lot of reactions.
Yeah.
And
Great.
we want to rub more salt in the wound.
Yeah. Yes.
Responding to this video. So there is a video here that Alex O'Connor did. It is just a short video. And so we are going to watch the video and then respond to it shortly with Dave here. And then we will now proceed and go to our sharing. I hope that screen is visible on your side, Dave,
Oh,
right?
yes, it is.
Okay, good. So let me just go ahead and play the video, and then we can share.
And Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Piers Morgan, Sam Harris, Destiny, professors, bishops. How did their debate styles vary, and who is your most formidable opponent?
Yeah, I'm very lucky actually when you put it like that. I sort of, I suppose the past year or two I've gotten to debate a lot of big names. It's been very exciting, and everybody has a slightly different approach. But I think I used to be more confrontational than I am now. When I go into a debate, I'll say what I think, and I'll say it forthrightly, and I'll look you in the eye, and I'll say it straight. But I don't get too riled up. I don't get angry. I don't get hostile. Really, doesn't really happen. Happens occasionally. The only time that happens is when I think that I'm not getting through to somebody, and I'm not getting through to them for some reason that isn't entirely innocent. I recently had a debate with Dinesh D'Souza. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a conservative commentator. I don't know too much about him, but I felt in many ways he wasn't prepared for the debate. I felt like he wasn't actually listening to what I was saying a lot of the time. I felt like that his questions weren't really making sense in the context of the discussion. So I got a little bit riled up, a little bit like more forthright. But most of the people I debate are receptive to my energy, right? Like you can get a different energy out of someone. If you watch Ben Shapiro debating college students, and someone comes up to the mic and says, like, "Hey man, why are you such a racist?" And suddenly he's sort of defensive, and he'll like snap back at them, and he'll like shut them down, so to speak, right? But if you watch the conversation I had with him, it's very smiley, it's very sort of happy. We shake hands, and it's just a much more pleasant conversation. And so I don't think it's actually so much about what they're like. I think it's about what you're like. You can bring a different energy out of people. Same thing with Jordan Peterson. He's got that ability to really like let out a demon that's inside him that can just absolutely. It's the thing that comes out in like the GQ interview, that real like fierce Peterson. And I'm sure that if I'd have asked questions in a particular way, I could have maybe gotten that out of him too, but I didn't. That was more to do with me than it was to do with him.
Right, but you're saying that was an unpleasant experience because you probably saw him as somewhat bad faith. Like he wasn't actually there to try to learn, maybe, but who was someone that was good faith, but they were just extremely challenging to debate, maybe because they had really strong points or just because their style of rhetoric was effective?
Yes, the most formidable. It's difficult to say. I remember, well, a long time ago, I debated the guy that I just mentioned, Trent Horn. I debated him years ago, and I remember at the time thinking like, "Wow, that was powerful." Because at the time, I'd been debating a lot of people. There was a lot of like shouting and putting down and this kind of thing. And Trent came in very calmly and put forward what are very good sort of arguments for the existence of God, very powerful, very difficult to respond to. And he did it calmly and politely, but effectively. And I remember coming away from that thinking like, "Wow, that was
what were his arguments?"
So I think the principal one that we probably discussed was something called the contingency argument, which will be about explanations for things. So there's a difference between something happening contingently and something happening necessarily. For something to be contingent means that the reason that it is the way it is, or the explanation for the way that it is due to something else. So like, why is this cup here? That's contingent on the fact that I put it there. It's contingent on the fact that I was, thirsty, right? Why is this curtain red? Well, that's a contingent fact. It could have been blue. It was contingent on someone's decision to design it in that way. So things that are contingent could have been a different way, but they are this way. And there's this principle called the principle of sufficient reason, which says that for anything that is the case, any contingent thing will have a sufficient reason as to why it is the case. It's not just randomly red. There's a reason why it's red. So everything that contingently exists has some explanation as to why it exists. But the explanation itself will either be contingent or it'll be necessary. There are things that are necessarily true, like why does a square have 4 sides? That's just what a square is. Right? That's not contingent. That doesn't depend on what someone thought. That doesn't depend on some other explanation or fact. It just is. It's almost true without explanation, right? And so anything that's contingent, like the existence of this table, it could have failed to exist. It could have not existed. You could have not existed if your parents didn't meet, right? So there's a reason why you do exist instead of not existing. In a way that there's not a reason why a square has 4 sides instead of 3. That's just what a square is. But there is a reason why you exist instead of not existing. Okay, because that's because your parents met. Okay, why did your parents meet? Is that a necessary fact? No, it could have not happened. So there must be some explanation as to why it happened instead of not happening. And then that thing itself, that explanation will be contingent or necessary. And you'll keep going back in the chain of explanation until if you get something contingent, then there'll be further explanation. The only place that can bottom out is in something necessarily true. And so everything has to bottom out in some necessary existence. And that's what he then goes on to identify with God. A little bit complicated, but I thought, quite a powerful.
What was your argument against that, though?
Well, I think that, so theists will want to say that everything in the universe, every contingent thing that could have been this way, could have been that way, it exists because God made it that way. God is the necessary thing at the basis, at the foundation of reality. Now, it's my supposition that a necessary thing cannot be the sufficient reason or the sufficient cause of a contingent thing. There can't be a necessary cause for a contingent thing, because to say something is necessary is to say it has to be true. If something's necessarily true, it cannot be false. 2 and 2 is 4. That's true, and it can't not be true. That curtain is red. That's true, but it could have not been true. It's a different kind of truth. Right? There's truth which could have not been true, and there's truth which have to be true. Necessary truth means it has to be true. There's no way it can be false. Now, suppose you have a necessary thing. We'll call it X. That necessary thing causes Y. If X causes Y, then as long as X is necessarily true, well, Y has to be necessarily true as well. Because if it's the case that if X, then Y, then as long as X is true, Y is going to be true. And so if X is necessarily true, that means it's always true, it can't be false. Y can't be false either. But what this argument wants to say is that you have a necessary truth which causes a contingent thing. So something which had to be true, causing something which could have been false.
I'm sorry, what? Wait a second. No, that can't be Alex. Alex O'Connor wouldn't make that mistake. No, that is so. Oh goodness. Alex made a very serious mistake there, because he's talking about like Leibniz's contingency argument. Well, he could have been talking about a host of various different arguments on contingency, but that's just a misunderstanding of it. I don't get the sense at all from anyone that I've seen in philosophy that because there's a necessary thing or a necessary being, therefore everything else becomes necessary too, right? This would follow in like an atheistic, deterministic, or necessitarianism worldview, where someone says, oh well, the thing that's at the baseline of reality are these like quantum waves or these quantum wave functions, even though equations don't make anything. But for some reason there are these equations that exist, and they collapse in a quantum vacuum and they create universes, right?
Mhm.
And those are governed by equations, and those equations necessitate a certain outcome. Well, yeah, if atheism is true, then you could say that the universe is a necessary byproduct of those necessary equations. But the whole argument is that atheism isn't true, and that instead of there being an impersonal kind of some sort of like impersonal reality, we're talking about a personal reality. And not just a personal reality, but a personal reality that has free will and is able to itself choose the kind of reality that comes out, right? Because we
Mhm.
could say that God could have chosen for there to be a universe made fully of red circles, or God could have chosen to make a universe that is just like one electron, or God could have chosen to make an empty universe, or God could have chosen to make our universe as he did. But all of those are dependent upon God's choice, right? So I
Yeah.
think he makes it sound like, oh, well, a necessary thing would only produce necessary things. But that's like if it was a computer or an impersonal cause. But the whole argument, if you and I can agree on this, I think, brother, is that our God is not an impersonal force of nature or something, but
Yeah.
God is actually personal, multi-personal. And so
Yes.
I think that really, really misses the mark on what Christians are arguing for when we say that God is the necessary cause of the universe and all the things in it, as it's like, first cause.
Absolutely. And I also think that the problem that Alex has when we say God is necessary, by definition, it means his non-existence is not possible,
Mhm. Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So if God's non-existence is not possible, because that is what the argument is, that God is necessary, that he cannot not exist. That which is contingent is something that cannot exist, but God cannot not exist. He must exist. That is by definition. So
Yeah.
when Alex says that a necessary cause can only produce a necessary effect is a contradiction in terms.
Hmm.
That is to say that God must have existed ontologically prior to himself,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
which doesn't make sense. And actually think that is where the problem is, because a necessary being by definition is that which is uncaused.
Hmm.
It
Yeah.
cannot be caused. So
Yeah.
to say necessary must produce that which is necessary is to say it must be ontologically prior to itself, which doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Like I think it's weird because he even explains the principle of sufficient reason, be it from
Yeah.
Leibniz or others. He explains that well by saying it's this principle that all these contingent things must have some sort of cause that's explanatorily relevant to that existent contingent thing. And so that goes back and back, and that is something that people have to uphold. Like if you get rid of the principle of sufficient reason, then you do
Mhm.
basically get rid of like all reasoning, all explanation, all causality, all science, all logic. Like you just get rid of all of it, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, there's no such thing as causation at all, right? So it's correct of him to affirm principle of sufficient reason, and that's good.
Yeah. That's
Uh,
true.
the
That's
issue
true.
is this: like a necessary being is something that cannot fail to exist, exists by the necessity of its own nature or definition, right? So its own nature is not caused, does not depend on anything, and is eternal and metaphysically like ultimate. So the explanation for the universe cannot be another contingent thing, because
Mhm.
again, if it was, then it would be something that's dependent on something else. But as he said, all these contingent things have to have an explanation, right? And so you go back
Absolutely.
to some sort of necessary thing. So the argument follows, but then for some reason he just rejects the conclusion, right? He just rejects the
Yeah, that's the
conclusion despite
problem.
the argument following by
Yeah.
saying, oh, well, I just don't believe a necessary thing could make contingent things. I'm like, well, a necessary thing would have to make contingent things because that's the kind of things a necessary being could make. Things that are
Yeah.
contingent upon its existence. Like that's the definition. I'm not following what the way he answered that. He kind of like chuckled when they said, what was your response to it?
Yeah, that's true.
He kind of chuckled. And he's like, well, I feel like Alex probably feels the weight of the fact that his response wasn't the best. Again, I don't think that follows. I've even read many atheistic philosophers who have, argued for a type of necessary entity. They'll usually just call it like a, if you go with the person that Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy just went against Richard Carrier. He'll say the thing that exists absolutely is an absolute nothing. And he says, which is so funny, some atheists call us silly, or they say that we're strawmanning them when we say that we say everything came from nothing. That's what you atheists believe. And they're like, don't strawman us. Well, here's the thing. One of the top well-known atheistic philosophers, Richard Carrier, actually does argue that an absolute nothing, to quote his article, an absolute nothing did produce everything. He says absolute nothing has the property of being able to make anything at all, which is funny to say that nothing has a property. So, you have like this necessarily existent absolute nothing. Other people say there's a necessarily existent set of quantum wave functions and a vacuum of nothingness. Other ones will say like string theory. All that to say, these different atheists will say that there's these different strings or these different quantum waves that could have made a different universe, that could have produced other universes, any other host of universes. Well, that's weird because then they have a necessary being that's able to make other universes, but hasn't, probably hasn't made all universes, which means that it's selecting somehow by some means which universes it produces and which ones it doesn't. So I feel like a lot of atheist philosophers wouldn't even agree with Alex's point here. But again, since this one is about theism, Christian theism, I would say that this is like extra silly because again, we're dealing not with like Brahman or some sort of impersonal entity. We're dealing with a personal God with personal will, personal relations, and personal desires. So I find this weird. Like my desires could be the cause of me choosing one ice cream over another. So it's strange that, you can take the notion of a personal entity, like, and then, expand that to God and say, yeah, well, God could have desires, but whatever he wants to choose out of all of his desires, that makes that thing necessary. I'm like, no, you said choose, which means he was contingent on his choice. So I think that's very silly. I don't know what Alex was thinking there.
Yeah, it collapses into irrationality if you think about it.
Yeah.
But, all right, that was just by the way. We will do more videos on atheism. David is so passionate on atheism.
Yeah. I actually have a whole section. I have a whole section in this book right here, Worldview Review, and my newest book also on. Actually, my newest book focuses mainly on atheism, but Mormonism too, and Islam and Jehovah's Witnesses. But in Worldview Review, I explain why atheism also just makes knowledge impossible. Just like, just all knowledge is just out the window. I think atheism is very silly.
we will do more videos on that.
Yeah.
You should watch out on that. Now, Dave, I want to play a song here and ask you if you will notice what that song is.
Okay.
When your own book told you to read it.
Yes.
Something don't add up. They say the Quran straight from above, every word from the mouth of God's love. But then it tells me the gospel is light, and to judge by what's in it, that's right. So I open it up and read what it says. Jesus died and he rose from the dead, but your book says no, he never died. So which one's true? Somebody lied. Who told you to judge by if it's broken? Why you call it?
Oh man, I love that song. I love that song.
It's amazing. You know, at my church that was performed.
Yeah, really?
Yeah. Reed Vaughn, Apostate Prophet, he actually came by. I hosted an apologetics conference at my church over the summer, this summer. And Dr. David Wood was there. Anthony Rogers was there, and also Apostate Prophet was there along with Hatun Tosh. And Apostate Prophet actually performed that song live on stage for the whole conference.
Oh man, I love this song. And
yeah, there's a couple of new ones, by the way, so be on the lookout, because I love the Islamic Dilemma one. I do love that one. The Al Zoot one is definitely one you should consider listening to.
Yeah, I will sure check it out. And I think that song is the best introduction into what we are going to discuss.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, the book, The Death of Allah. Let me just show this to friends here, and then we can. But you have the book with you. You can actually just show it so that the viewers can be able to.
It is on Amazon. The whole thing, I know it sounds kind of a strong title, so people might be thinking, oh, is this going to be like a really large set of crazy philosophical arguments? I'm like, no, it's actually only 67 pages.
67 pages,
because I wanted to make it really accessible for people, so I took all the other longer, and mind you, these are from a couple of years worth of PowerPoint presentations and even conference presentations I did over the summer and elsewhere on Islam and the issues with it theologically. So I took all these years of presentations. I think some of my PowerPoints on Allah and the theological issues with Allah were actually more than 67 pages, just some of my PowerPoint presentations. But I wanted to really condense it all down because, number one, I'm a teacher. I'm a high school teacher. Obviously, I want my students to be able to understand what's being said. So I always try to break it into a really small package. You know, I think each dilemma is maybe max of 8 pages or something. So each dilemma is very accessible. And these 10 dilemmas, not just like, you know, paradoxes, but actual dilemmas that lead to like logical issues, like logical impossibility for Islamic theology, are really, really damaging. But there's a bonus to this. After I wrote this book, I did want to make sure, and I'll make a note of this in the future, this isn't just the death of Allah. This is also the death of all Unitarian models of God.
Yes.
Like just across the board. For instance, I brought this book with me when I take my students out to evangelize to Jehovah's Witnesses every now and then. There's some Jehovah's Witnesses in the town where I teach at. And so what I'll do is I'll take my students out and I'll just get them to evangelize to some of the Jehovah's Witnesses out in the corner. And Jehovah's Witnesses are strict Unitarians, right? And so what I decided to do is, while my students had all their notes and they were asking them questions, I decided, hey, wait a second, they're Unitarians. What would happen if I asked them one of the questions from my book? So I did, and they didn't know how to respond. And then the Jehovah's Witnesses started to argue with each other about how to respond to my question, which is wild. My students started to watch them argue, and I was like, whoa, this is quite interesting. I started to realize it's not just, this is really damaging to Islamic theology, because about 90 to 95% of all Muslims have the exact same model of God, classical Islam. So classical Islamic theology is pretty ubiquitous. I mean, it's pretty rare you'll ever find a Muslim who doesn't hold to or affirm the 3 or 4 major attributes I talk about in this book for Islamic apologetics. And so that means that 90 to 95% of Muslims you talk with will have to affirm these attributes. And then the other 5% will hold something like it, which still leads to a lot of issues. So You know, the whole book is premised on these three major attributes of Allah. Just three. That's actually all that really matters. In classical Islamic theism, Allah is Tawheed, and Tawheed means he is just fully one. No persons, no relations, no relationships, no parts or anything. Allah is Tawheed, he is fully one. So it's usually the comparison is Tawheed versus Trinity. So, well, we would say that God is one in being and three in persons. They would say, no, God is one in being and one in person, right? He's just one. That's all he is, Tawheed, oneness. So Tawheed, and then immutability, right? God has no changes to his essence, no changes to his actions, no changes to what he is or the kind of being that he is. So Allah is fully immutable, which leads to some issues that I'll go into soon in their model of God. And then finally, their version of pure actuality, in which Allah is perfect and gains no perfections. He gains no actualizations. And so Allah is the perfect state of being in himself and will always, you know, whatever his state of being is what he'll look to for all action. Pure act, no potencies. These three attributes lead to some really big issues for a monotheistic Tawheed version like Islam. If you have a monotheistic Trinitarian view, then all of these would be gone, right? Because the Trinity actually explains a lot. And the biggest issue is the Tawheed version of monotheism that cannot explain these big issues with Allah based off those three main attributes: pure actuality, and you know, his metaphysical perfection, immutability, and Tawheed, the oneness of Allah.
Absolutely. So we will. I think we should be ambitious and do videos for one dilemma at a time.
Okay, all
But
right.
today we just will take sort of a bird's eye view into the book, and then we will now narrow down. My proposal will be to begin from number 10.
Okay, nice. That's fun. That's a good idea.
I find that to be more interesting, so that we can listen to the whole dilemma song.
That's perfect.
Okay, Dave. Before we get into the book, and just briefly go over each one of the dilemmas that you highlight in the book. What is it that prompted you to write this book?
Yes. Well, you know, I started to notice this weird pattern. So there's this beautiful, beautiful argument that's been around for a couple of years now called the Quranic Islamic dilemma. Usually online, they just call it the Islamic dilemma, but it's specifically the Quranic Islamic dilemma. And the Islamic dilemma goes like this. Well, the Quran affirms the preservation, authority, and truth and authoritative teaching power of the Jewish and Christian scriptures, specifically the Torah, the Psalms, and the Gospel or the Injil. And that's true. The Quran does affirm that the Torah and the Gospel are speech sent down by Allah. So, according to the Quran, no speech sent down by Allah, like the Quran, is able to be lost or corrupted or edited or overcome by human efforts because, again, as I explained in my book, the Quran makes it very clear. The Quran says nobody can overcome Allah's speech, nobody can edit his speech, nobody can alter his words, is what it says. Well, the Quran also says that the Gospel and the Torah are sent down by Allah, which means they cannot be corrupted. But if they cannot be corrupted, well, then that means that the Torah and the Gospels have not been corrupted, which means that the Torah and the Gospel available at the time of Muhammad, he was affirming. But we know what was in the Torah and the Gospel at the time of Muhammad, and that was the Gospel we have today, right? That Jesus died and rose again, and he's God. So I was seeing this great argument. I think it's awesome. As I'm talking with Muslims about this argument, and as I watch a lot of YouTube videos about Christians talking with Muslims about this argument, I always notice this shift, right? Some Muslims are willing to admit, oh, this is really bad. Like, this is a really bad argument. Like, I got to leave Islam. This is a really bad argument. This destroys our entire religion, which is true, by the way. The Islamic dilemma is actually all you need to show that Islam is false. It's the only argument you for sure need. But if you watch tons of these videos of a lot of Muslims who aren't being honest with themselves, they'll say, okay, well, I don't know how to answer that, but Muhammad's still a good guy. You know, he's still our most perfect moral example of all time. So they'll hop from the Islamic dilemma to Muhammad and say Muhammad's got this perfect moral character. He's according to Surah 33, I think, he's a perfect prophet for all times, perfect example for all people at all times. Until then, the Christian will go to the hadiths and go to the tafsir commentaries on parts of the Quran to explain what some of Muhammad's actions are. And so then usually that starts falling apart, because a lot of the things that Muslims would say are evil in modern degenerate Western culture are the very things that Muhammad was doing in 7th century Arabia. So then the Muslim starts to lose out on that argument. And so over and over and over and over, they'll say, oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The simple truth is this: Islamic theism just makes more sense. The Islamic model of God just makes more sense. And I thought, wow, wait a second. So they're seeing that these other two arguments, right? Muhammad is not a perfect moral example. And previously, the Quran affirms the Bible, which means that the Quran is affirming a book is true, which disagrees with the Quran, which is an intrinsic contradiction, right? These Muslims are seeing how strong these responses are from Christians, but their biggest holdup psychologically is that they keep on saying, well, at the end of the day, Islamic monotheism with one God, which again, we believe in one God too, but they'll say, well, no, we really believe in just one God. And I'm like, all right. They say we believe in one God, and that just makes more sense because our view of one God is just one person. And that makes more sense than whatever your Trinity is, where you say it's one God, but you say it's three persons. And I said, no, if that's the only thing left that's holding you back from converting to Christianity, is that you just think that your version of monotheism makes more sense, then I'll show you that you're wrong. And so I made the death of Allah. I made it to show people, and I kid you not, you can go into multiple live streams and a Christian will bring up the Islamic dilemma, and a Muslim will either respond by saying, well, Christianity doesn't make any sense either. Your Trinity makes no sense. They always go back to the Trinity consistently. They'll say, Tawheed, our doctrine of God, makes sense, yours doesn't. So which is a weird response, by the way. I think any logic professor would be very upset if they saw that someone, they knew something was logically nonsensical, like illogical. And they said, well, it doesn't matter if my beliefs are logical, your beliefs are logical, right? That's a tu quoque fallacy, isn't it? We know that from Dr. Mauser's class. And so besides the fact that this is just not a fair switch, like people shouldn't go around just switching up arguments like that. Even though that's not logical, I think it's at least fair to help the Muslim realize that even the last leg they're standing on, that their God makes more sense, that's nonsense. I mean, that is just straight up absolute Unitarian nonsense. So that's why I wrote the book, because I wanted to show them, no, you're wrong. Your model of God actually makes less sense about reality.
Absolutely. And I can actually agree with you that, I can conclude actually from the conclusion of your book, you say it is not that, I think it's the last part that is the dilemma number 10. Mm-hmm. It is not that we are the ones who are killing Allah. It is like Allah destroys himself,
Yes, yeah, exactly. He's been dead the whole time, and I'm just letting people know.
Yeah, you're just letting people know what Allah has done to himself.
Yes.
Now, let us go to dilemma number 1, the causal dilemma. Could Allah create anything at all? And let me just read the first paragraph from your chapter, and then you can comment briefly on it, and then we move to the second one. Mm-hmm. This is what you say at the beginning. You say the causal dilemma, that is the immutability versus creator. You say that this dilemma pits the necessary attributes of immutability and pure actuality against the theological requirement of God as a volitional temporal creator. Islamic orthodoxy explicitly rejects eternal causation, the idea that the universe equally emanated from God, as proposed by some philosophers, because the Quran asserts creation began in time. Now, Dave, before you comment on that, will you please let us at least define terms for our hearers? When we say God is pure act or pure actuality, what do we mean? And what do we mean by God's immutability? And then you can now explain. Yeah.
Of course. I actually keep it in my introduction. Because I always tell my students, number one rule in class, before you start any argument, what's your first step? And my students always repeat back to me, define your terms. And I'm like, there we go. So I actually keep it in the introduction just so that people know. Tawheed is, God's absolute unity, right? And so when we're talking about that, God is a non-composite essence without internal distinctions between essence and attributes or relations at all. So there's no such thing as relationality in Allah. There's no personal relations. There's no persons. There's no variation of desires, right? Allah is fully Tawheed. He is one being and one person, nothing else, which leads to a lot of issues, as we're about to get into. He has no causal relations either, right? So there's no begetting in Allah. There's no procession in Allah. Allah is just Allah. No activity before creation. Number two is immutability, and immutability means unchanging in terms of essence or attributes in any general sense. So God exists outside of any type of temporal succession in the Islamic view, and Allah cannot change in any term of his essence. And I even grant, for the sake of argument for this book, I actually try to be a little bit nicer, and I say, all right, you know what, I'll even allow the soft version of immutability that a lot of philosophers hold to, where they say, well, maybe he could change in terms of his Cambridge properties, but no change to his essence or his eternal relations, right? His internal relations. I'll even allow that for the sake of it. But the issue is that while I was about to allow that, Islamic theology doesn't allow that. Classical Islamic theism says no changes to his internal essence, to his character, to his relationality, to his relations in the future. There's no change to Allah whatsoever. So that's kind of an issue. That means something. That means whatever Allah is prior to creation, he must be that kind of thing, always without change. Nothing about his essence, who he essentially is ever able to change. And then finally, pure actuality. God has no potentiality, which means he is eternally actualized. There's no imperfections. He is the standard of perfections, and there's no perfections he can gain. And if he can gain perfections, if there's something he's missing without creation, then that means that there's actually an imperfection in Allah that needs to be later actualized by the creation, which, back to the atheism part from the beginning of this, it actually means that he is contingent. His perfection is contingent on creation. So pure actuality says, no. He has full perfections, all metaphysical perfections. He is fully actualized. There's nothing he gains over time in terms of perfections. Which leads to a really big issue for this first dilemma.
Yeah, of course. And then now you say that now creation is a temporal cause.
Yes.
I mean, is a temporal thing. Now, will you now explain why the Muslim conception of God and taking those attributes as you have explained them makes it impossible for him to be a creator?
Oh, yeah. No, it's actually, the wonderful thing is that these dilemmas are really simple, because a dilemma just has two parts, right? Horn one or part one of the dilemma, Allah must have, again, remember, he's like by himself, right? Allah is not causing anything prior to creation. Everybody in the audience should remember that. Allah is by himself. There's no persons. There's no causal relations in Allah. The early Christians would talk about the Son being begotten or caused, not created. They would even say that in the creeds. Begotten, not created, right? The Spirit would proceed out, but not created. It caused. So the Christians would talk about internal, eternal causal relations. And they would say the Father has eternally begotten or eternally caused the Son. The Father and Son have eternally spirated out or caused the Holy Spirit. So we would say in the Christian conception of God that there is this eternal set of causational principles, right? Our God is always causing. Our God is always causing. Muslims can't say that. Allah is not eternally causing. He's not, because is there any begetting in the Islamic view of God?
It's none. There's
No.
none. There's none.
No. He says, they actually say he cannot beget a son, for he has no partner, is what it says in the Quran, right? He needs a lady in order to make a son. So, he cannot beget a son, nor is he begotten. And then, of course, there's no spirating Holy Spirit. So there's no causal sense, which means before creation, Allah is non-causal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which means in order for him to create, he has to become causal. But that means he went from non-causal to causal. But
that violates his immutability.
Yes, exactly. It destroys his immutability, but that's an essential doctrine of the view of Allah, right? He has to actually change in order for him to create. But he's not allowed to change, because if he's immutable, he's not allowed to change. And also because of his pure actuality, he wouldn't change, because he already exists in this state of perfections proper to a metaphysically isolated being like Allah. So he goes from non-causal to causal in the Islamic view, which isn't a change that destroys immutability. And therefore, there's a couple options. There's two options. Number one, a Muslim could say, oh, well, the creation is eternal. Allah has just always been creating the universe. He's always been making the universe. Therefore, there's not a time where he went from non-causing to causing, because he was always causing the universe. Well, here's the thing. That according to Islamic theology, there's only one eternal entity, and the only eternal entity is Allah, right? So if we make creation co-eternal with Allah, even if it's like caused by him, then that would be considered shirk.
Yes.
That would say now we're associating an eternal entity alongside Allah, which is shirk. So if a Muslim wants, go ahead.
You want to be forgiven for that.
Yeah. No Muslim's going to be able to be forgiven if they go around saying that the universe is co-eternal with Allah. But they would have to say that in order for them to explain creation. They would have to say that creation eternally emanates from Allah, which, by the way, I think Al-Ghazali and some other early Islamic philosophers did argue. The reason they argued for that is because they had to, because that's their only option. They said, no, Allah must have had like the universe eternally emanating from him, because otherwise the act of creation would change Allah. And then all the other Muslims were like, no, you got to be quiet, because the Quran says that he made it in time. He didn't make it eternally. So again, if you say eternal creation, you go against the Quran, and you also claim the universe is eternal with Allah, which causes shirk. But then if you go with Horn 2, the second part of that dilemma, the Muslim could affirm that Allah did not make creation. He just didn't make it. And so he didn't change in his essential attributes. He did not make the creation at all. You could say that, but then if you say Allah didn't create the universe, who did, right? Or the Muslim could try and argue for the second part. He did begin to create the universe, but then that again implies a change to his being, right? So either it's eternal causation, in which Allah, if he eternally caused it, then that commits shirk, and it makes another eternal being with Allah, which is not allowed in Islamic theology. Or they say that Allah began to create the universe, but then that means that he began to become causal. He began to become relational, right? Because he also wasn't related to anything prior to creation. Well, now he is related to something, a universe, because he's the creator. And so now he becomes relational. But then again, that violates his immutability. So this violates his tawheed. This violates his immutability. And then if he decides to not create at all so that he doesn't violate it, then he's not the creator, which means we don't have an explanation for the universe. No matter what you do, you can't win. Allah is not the creator of the universe. And more specifically, Allah could not have been the creator of the universe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that flows into your second dilemma. It is still on the issue of creation, your second dilemma. And I just want to read a portion here. That will be page 14. And then I will allow you to explain how this second part naturally flows from the first one and the implications thereof.
Yeah.
You say that therefore before creation, Allah can only or will love what he already possesses in himself.
Mhm.
His will is eternally turned inward, directed toward his own perfection, since there is nothing external to will or delight in. In that way, we can say Allah only wills isolation, self-existence, non-relationality, oneness. And as such, the things that Allah will never will be plurality, relationships, unified, multiplicity. And then you explain how that creates attention. Now,
Yes.
will you now expand on that, please?
Well, the beautiful thing is these first two dilemmas actually do explain almost completely the rest of the book.
Yeah.
There's a reason I set up the first two dilemmas at the beginning. If people understand these first two dilemmas, the rest of the book follows pretty logically and pretty simply. So again, keeping those three, immutability, pure actuality, tawhid. So Allah, according to Islamic philosophers, all perfections in the universe pre-exist in Allah. Right? This is actually one of the cool things that Jewish, Christian, Muslim philosophers all agree about. All
Yes.
perfections that exist in reality, all goods and all perfections pre-exist in the divine nature. That's actually why Allah would call certain things good, because they pre-exist within himself, right? This is actually a response to the Euthyphro dilemma. They would say, no, these perfections exist in Allah in some way. It's not arbitrary or random, and it's also not Allah submitting to a standard outside of himself. All these things that are good or beautiful or true are because they're perfections. All the things that are good about them pre-exist in Allah, right? And this is because Allah only ever wills that which is within himself, because that's what he's able to will. He's only able to will that which he sees as good. And prior to creation, as I argue in that first paragraph, Allah wills that which he sees within himself.
Yeah.
Well, here's a very serious issue. While the first dilemma says Allah could not will a universe, I also argue it's way worse than that. Allah would not will a universe, because Allah only can will things that he sees within himself. And which main attribute am I focusing on besides immutability and pure actuality? What was that other super important attribute that Muslims have besides immutability and pure actuality? And it's the opposite of our Trinity.
That is Tawheed, or Allah's oneness.
Exactly, Tawheed. Well, here's the serious issue now. If Allah is Tawheed, and Muslims will say this is the beauty of Islam, Tawheed is the beauty of Islam, I'll say no, it's your destruction. You see,
They say it is actually simple.
yeah, this is it. It's actually the worst thing for you, because Allah wills whatever is in himself, which means Allah wills oneness. Allah sees Tawheed or oneness as the most perfect state of being. Allah does not see plurality. Allah does not see relations or relationships as a eternally good thing, which means also he wouldn't create a universe, because then he would have a new relationship. And Allah would not see relationships as a good thing. But also Allah sees oneness as a good thing. If Allah makes a universe, literally universe, right? Verse means many, uni means one, so it's the many in one. Would Allah will a plurality when he sees singularity as the only perfect thing? Of course not. Allah would not will plurality, or as I say in the book, unified multiplicity. He would not will unified multiplicity, because Allah doesn't have within himself unified multiplicity. He doesn't have multiple persons or multiple relations or anything like that pre-existing in his nature. Allah is Tawheed. So if Allah is looking at himself, he would never, ever, ever will a universe, because to will a universe would actually be to will against himself. But according to Islamic theology, Allah cannot will against himself, because if Allah is willing against himself, then that's like saying Allah wills not Allah. Allah wills anti-Allah. And that doesn't make any sense. So not only does it make no logical sense, but it again leads to this dilemma, which says that Allah would not will a universe or anything like this universe at all.
Yes. And I think we had sort of talked about this last time when we were doing the stream. And I think Muslims will believe that all perfections, the things that we see in creation exist perfectly in Allah.
Hmm.
And recently, I actually brought up this with a Muslim. I told a Muslim, if we see relationality in creation, that means that has to exist perfectly in Allah. But the problem you have is your conception of God as a pure monad makes it impossible for us to explain the relationality that we see in creation.
Yes.
So if that is not in Allah, then there is no way Allah can actually cause relationality as we see it.
Yes. Yes. It's
Yeah.
impossible. He wouldn't want to. It would actually
Yes.
be against his nature to do so.
Yes.
Like in Allah, and now the Muslim could say, well, what if Allah does things he doesn't want to do? I would say, all right, so who's forcing him to? Who's forcing him to act against his will? Who's forcing him to act against his nature? Or then we would say, oh, so Allah doesn't will the most perfect thing. Because according to Allah, Allah is the most perfect thing. So if the Muslim says, well, Allah doesn't have to will the best thing, that means that Allah doesn't have to will the good thing, the perfect thing, or even things in alignment with himself. Allah sees for some reason things that are different from him as better than himself. Allah views plurality, which is opposite to his nature, as better than himself. And I would agree. I would agree actually with Allah in that case. I would agree with Allah that things that are plural, unified pluralities, are better than he is. So that's why I wouldn't believe in him, because unified plurality is better, because Allah says so too. And we know this because in the Quran, Allah uses we pronouns, right? So if Allah is using we pronouns, and Muslims will say, well, that's just the we of royal majesty, which number one, there's no evidence of that in the Arabic. But number two, the reason somebody says we or us, if it's a royal we, like the Queen of England or something, we would like to choose this. Well, when a queen or a king says that, the reason they do that is because it represents their royal court, which means they see it as a better thing to represent many persons in one instead of just to represent themselves. Well, if Allah is using we in the Quran, that means Allah sees it as a better thing to represent himself as many instead of just as one. So the Quran doesn't even uphold that Islamic theology.
I've always wondered when I've read the Quran, I've always wondered when the Quran says we sent down the book confirming that which was before. We are coming to that.
Yeah. It's a strange thought.
Let us move to the third dilemma, aesthetic dilemma. Will Allah make this universe? So what is the problem? What is the problem here, Dave? Why doesn't the Muslim conception of God or Allah fail to explain beauty as we see it in creation?
Yeah, well, the beautiful thing is, I actually went through a couple Islamic, quite a few Islamic philosophers on the nature of aesthetics or beauty, and Christian and Muslim philosophers are pretty unified on the fact that beauty is essentially harmony or ordered parts, right? So they would say parts in right relationship together or unified harmony, perfect harmony. That's an essential quality of beauty. I actually write about this in some of my seminary essays in Sleepy Seminarian 2. So that was my collection of seminary essays I wrote. And in the second book on it, I've been doing a lot of work on beauty. And beauty, according to Christian and Muslim philosophers for quite a long time, has a type of unified harmony or harmonious functioning of parts.
Yes.
Well, here's the issue. If the overwhelming vast majority of Muslim scholars and philosophers agree about that, and also, as my book says, according to this part of Islam, the Quran says, he who perfected everything which he created, everything made with fitting form, proportion, and symmetry in the Quran. That's 32:7. And we see the explanations of that on harmony and unity, perfection and unity and diversity from the Quran, Al-Teen 95:4. We have indeed created humankind in the best of molds, right? So he sees all these different molds of creation as a beautiful thing, right? In the rest of the Quran, in them is beauty for you when you bring them home in the evening and when you lead them out of pasture in the morning. So returning cattle to their home, these harmony and daily cycles and relational community, being related to your animal and walking your animal back and forth. There's something beautiful about that, according to the Quran. I would agree. Relationality to another being is a beautiful thing. That's kind of an issue for Islam, as we're about to see. Allah is beautiful and he loves beauty, according to the Hadith. So he is beautiful. I heard a Muslim one time say, well, Allah is not beautiful. He just makes beautiful things. And I would be like, whoa, you're saying Allah is not beautiful? But I thought all perfections pre-exist in Allah. And they're like, yes, but he's not beautiful. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, my God is beautiful. So I think I have a point there. And according to the hadiths, actually, they say that Allah is beauty and he loves beauty. Now, why would Allah love harmonious parts working together? Why would Allah love harmonious relationships? Why would Allah love communion or community? Why would Allah love these things? That's a good question. Or how about this part right here? When Allah created Adam and Eve, said, Allah has not created a creation more beautiful than us. Then appeared in the form of Fatima, right, in the hadiths. And then also in the hadiths, the first batch of people who enter paradise will be unified. Their hearts will be as the heart of a single man, no enmity among them. Which means, according to the hadiths and the Quran, Allah sees unified harmony, right? He sees multiple things in right, perfect relationship together. Allah sees that as beautiful. And I would have to ask you, why on earth would Allah see multiple things rightly related together as beautiful? I mean, before creation.
Because that has to pre-exist in him.
Yes. Yes. Of course. It can't, that's right. It has to be from something that pre-exists him, because it can't be from Allah himself, because Allah has no harmonious parts or relations within his own nature. There's no sense in, again, that goes against Tawheed, and that's like one of the most important doctrines in Islam. Now, they're all important according to classical Islamic theology, but Tawheed is like their crowning jewel. So Allah would have to look at himself and say, that's ugly. I don't like that. I'm going to make a universe that's the opposite of me. But that's weird, because not just because the hadiths say that Allah is beautiful and he loves beauty, but more than that, that's because it goes against logic. Why would Allah see himself as ugly or disgusting and make a universe that's the exact opposite of himself? Allah would see, now, of course, a Muslim could say, no, Allah sees everything about himself as beautiful and as the perfection of beauty. And I would say, all right, once again, what are the kind of things that Allah sees as beautiful? They would say oneness. Oneness is beautiful. And I would say, oh, so is everything in this universe just one? Is everything in this universe just one being? And they're like, no, there's dogs and atoms and molecules. And as I write in the book, right, there's all these different kinds of relationships. There's laws of physics and laws of biology and genetics. And there's this fine tuning of these different constants in the universe. And we have different kinds of relationships at the personal level. I've got family and I've got friends and I've got, a wife and eventually very soon a child, and all these different kinds of relationships that we view. We even have pets. As weird as we are, humans are weird. We have pets from different species. Like humans have a lot of different relationships. The universe is filled with tons of different relationships, and Christians and Muslims agree all of these different relationships are beautiful things that God, designed, and that God calls beautiful. The God of Christianity calls all these relationships and these unities and all these things perfect and good. The God of Islam, oddly enough, does too, but that doesn't make any sense. Why would the God of Christianity make a universe like this? Well, because he exists as a plural unity. The God of Christianity exists as one God who has these eternal perfect relations, multiple relations within him. So God sees multiple relations and right unity as a good thing because they pre-exist in him. Yes. He would see community and friendship and relationships as good things because they pre-exist in him. The God of Islam has no explanation for this. There's no explanation, and any attempt at explaining it actually leads to legitimate issues, right? We could say that
he's a monad.
Yes, yeah. All he is a monad. Like all he is a monad. And yet, even though these Muslim philosophers talk about how beauty is harmony, proportionality, relational unity, ordered structure, symmetry, they'll talk about all these things. But the issue is this: if a Muslim says Allah eternally values aesthetic, relationality, harmony, unity, ordered plurality, then these perfections must pre-exist in Allah, which is horn one of the dilemma. But if those exist in Allah, that means that he is multi-personal and has relationality, but that violates Tawheed. If they go to the second possible answer and say, no, Allah does not eternally possess any aesthetic perfections or relational harmony, then that means that he would have to begin to value beauty. He would begin to will harmony. He would begin to appreciate or value relational unity. He would begin to desire ordered plurality only after the creation, which means, again, it violates his immutability because he changes essentially, and also his pre-actuality, because now there were these perfections of beauty that he gained over time, and therefore that one doesn't work either. This is not the universe that a god like Allah would make. Maybe he would. One person said, well, what if you made a universe that had like one electron? Like just one a whole universe was just one electron. And technically I would say that sounds better, but it still wouldn't work because now he's related to it.
Yeah,
and he can't cause anything. So that wouldn't work either.
I love what you write. This is what you say in page 23. I think this is in contradistinction to the Islamic view of God. You say, this is what you say. You say beauty requires relational harmony among distinct yet unified elements. The Christian God possesses this eternally within himself. The Father loves the Son loves the Father. The Spirit is the eternal bond of their love. This eternal relationship is neither composite nor temporal, but an unchanging communion, an active harmony that is divine simplicity, rightly understood as simplicity of perfect relation and not isolation. So that means if you want to see a God who explains beauty, we have one.
Yeah, yes, we do. Yes, we do. And as far as I can tell, we have the only one that really makes sense.
Yes. Let us go to dilemma number 4. The 4 to 5, that is 4 to 5 now. We are now on 4 to 5 and then 6 to 7.
Yes.
The impossibility of miracles.
Yes.
Could Allah perform miracles? Now, Dave, why is it impossible for Allah to perform miracles?
Yeah, so this is one that you're not going to find, kind of like my aesthetic argument, and also my second causal dilemma argument. A lot of these things are not things you're going to find in the philosophical literature, and I don't know why. Islam has actually very few people. I made this argument during my time in seminary about the nature of miracles and miracle creation. Islam and also like modern Judaism, along with any other Unitarian model of God, have no explanation for miracles at all, like at all, because, or at least not one that's consistent with the idea of the God, the ultimate God, being the one to actually perform miracles, right? And yet that's the exact thing that the Bible explains, that God himself performs miracles. According to the Quran, Allah performed miracles in the past. He doesn't anymore, but he used to. The last miracle Allah gives is that of the Quran. And, of course, modern Judaism would say the same thing. Different Unitarian religions would say the same thing, that God himself performs miracles. Well, the issue is that causes a big issue if you don't have the right model of God. There's 3 components to a miracle. A miracle requires relationality or interactivity, as I would say, transcendence and benevolence, active benevolence. So if you want to explain what a miracle is, it is an interactive, transcendent act of benevolence. It's an interactive, right? Because God is choosing to interact with creation in a certain way. So it's a relational or interactive, benevolent act of transcendence, right? Or I think I even have a specific definition here that I really liked that makes it pretty simple for people. There it is. Yeah. In other words, a miracle could be defined as an interactive, transcendent act of benevolence. And as such, that means that God is able to transcend the natural laws that he created to interact with his creation for somebody's good. That's actually what that means. A miracle is a moment in which God transcends the natural laws of the creation he's created in order to interact with his creation for somebody's benefit or their benevolence. Here's why this makes no sense in Islam. Again, that principle of these perfections and these principles pre-existing in God, that a concept is going to get us through all these different dilemmas. The question first in this section is, could Allah perform miracles? And then also, secondly, after that is going to be, again, would Allah perform miracles? So could Allah perform miracles? Does Allah actually have these principles of miracle production in him prior to creation? Because again, he's pure act and immutability. So he can't gain these perfections of interactivity, transcendence, or benevolence after creation. He can't. But can he gain them? Does he have them beforehand? And so the first one is this eternal benevolence dilemma. The eternal benevolence. Was Allah the kind of being that was always willing the good of another? Because again, a miracle is done for the good of somebody. That is what a miracle is. It's a transcendent interactive act in which God transcends the natural laws for somebody else's good. So we'd have to say, oh, well, obviously that means that God must be the kind of being eternally, if it's an immutable God, that God must be the kind of being eternally who just is willing the good of another, right? Or as we would say, loving. Well, here's the issue. Islam strictly rejects the idea that Allah is eternally benevolent. Allah is not eternally benevolent. He's not eternally willing the good. But the definition of a miracle, as I've explained it, is it's a transcendent and interactive act of benevolence. Well, that means that Allah cannot at least do the benevolent part of that definition, because Allah has not eternally been benevolent. He has not been willing the good of another. What other is there for Allah to will the good of before creation? He's by himself. He can't will the good of another. So the first dilemma here is that he's not eternally benevolent. And the second dilemma here, by the way, for anyone who's going to read this, technically in every single chapter, there's actually 3 to 5 extra dilemmas you could make. That'll be in the second edition, because each of these actually have way more dilemmas. But I tried to make it concise by making it just like 10. There's way more dilemmas than just this, but I was trying to be nice to Muslims. So the second part, dilemma number 5, is that Allah has not been eternally interactive. Remember, the definition of a miracle is 3 principles pre-exist in a miracle: transcendence, interactivity, and benevolence, which means the kind of being that would do a miracle would have to have those principles or perfections pre-existing in them. And so not just benevolence, but interactivity. I'll grant transcendence just to be nice to Muslims, even though I think the Quran actually argues against Allah's transcendence, but I'm trying to be nice. Okay. I'm trying to be nice. And so for the, for the interactivity part, we would say, well, Allah has not eternally been interactive or relational. Who has Allah been eternally interacting with? Who has he been eternally relational with? Well, no one. So Allah, on dilemma 4, cannot be the kind of benevolent God needed to do a miracle. And number 5, Allah cannot be the kind of interactive God needed to do a miracle. Because if we say he is, that means that he would have needed to change from what he was before, which again goes against his, if you go with the benevolence one, it goes against his immutability and his tawheed, because he can't love something when there's nothing else to love in an active sense. And then for the interactivity, that would go against, again, tawheed, because there's no one to interact with. So all of this destroys Islamic theology.
Let me just read what you you write in conclusion here. This is what you say, and I think it ties up to the issue, the attribute of love or benevolence that we just talked about, and you've mentioned rightly that a miracle will require benevolence and some kind of interaction with the world that Allah has created. But this is what you say as a part of your conclusion. You say that either Allah's love requires a co-eternal recipient, which will destroy Tawheed, or Allah's love introduces internal relations, which will destroy his simplicity, or Allah's love is unactualized until creation. That means it destroys his immutability. So no option preserves the classical Islamic theology intact. Thus, the very concept of divine love and benevolence in Islam is metaphysically incoherent. And by the way, is that not the reason as to why love is, you can't say that Allah loves you. You're only but a slave of Allah.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, you cannot say anything else but a slave.
Yes.
Which is really sad if you think about it. You're talking to Muslims, and like that's why when you listen to Muslim theologians, they're the ones who will say that Allah is not love. And so like classical Islamic theologians and scholars will admit that Allah is not eternally loving. And I appreciate those people. I actually do. because at least they're honest. For some of them, so like some of your
Yes.
Dawa people who are doing basic Dawa, they'll lie to your random person on the street and say, "No, Allah loves you. Allah wants the best for you." But that's not true. The true theological Muslims who actually know classical Islamic theology know that Allah is not love, and Allah never has been love, and Allah never will be loving.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, ever.
Let us move to dilemma 6 and 7. The epistemology dilemma. Will Allah ever want ever want to be known? This
Yes.
is what you see here. You write in page 34. Let me just read and then you can comment on it. You say, if Allah has never been known, never valued being known, and never possessed internal relational knowledge prior to creation, then the very act of revealing himself through the Quran contradicts his eternal nature. This sort of flows from what we just shared in the previous two dilemmas.
Yes, that's right. I'm trying to do that on purpose so that if anyone's reading, my prayer is the book actually gets easier as time goes on. If you can make it past the first 3, then 4, 5, and 6. That's actually why I do those ones separately. 1, 2, and 3. If you can understand those ones, 4 and 5 will be easier, and 6 and 7
Be
will be
easier.
easier
That's
too.
true. That's true.
So this is really important. Sometimes Muslims will go against atheists in discussions and debates and say, "Oh, Allah has made himself known through creation." We could use these natural theology, natural philosophy arguments to show that this creation looks like it's the kind of thing made by a God, right? And that God must be Allah, alhamdulillah, right? And they'll say all this stuff and they'll be like, Rasulullah, alhamdulillah. And whenever I hear that, I think that's so strange because I don't think your God would ever want to be known. Not only that, but I don't think your God ever could make himself known. So he could not make himself known, and he wouldn't want to make himself known. So this whole could and would thing from before. So could Allah make himself known? Well, here's the issue. For Allah to make himself known, that means that he was eternally making himself known to another person.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
was Allah eternally making himself known to another person?
According to Islam, no.
No, of course not, right? So that's a silly claim. That's illogical. No, nobody would actually think that. And so if Allah is not eternally making himself known, Allah is not eternally communicating, if Muslims want to use that language, he's not eternally communicating to another person in an actualized sense that fulfills his pure actuality. And that means that prior to creation, Allah was not communicating. He was not expressing. So Allah could not make a universe in which he expresses himself to other people, which also makes a serious issue for the Quran, by the way, because the Quran is his self-expression to humanity, but he wouldn't want to do that. So Allah could not want to make himself known, but also Allah would not want to make himself known, right? So again, Allah only wills that which pre-exists in himself, and Allah's non-expression, the fact that he doesn't express himself to another person for eternity, Allah's non-expression and his isolation are the things he wills, which means Allah would not will that he is known in the universe or through the universe, right? Because he doesn't see expression or communication as a good thing. So Allah would not will the Quran because the Quran is the eternal speech of Allah made known to another person. And again, that would that would relate to a type of change in his Tawheed, right? Because now apparently there has to be a person with him prior to creation for him to communicate with. And now the Muslims say, no, he began to communicate with other persons. Well, that means that he's violated his immutability in pure actuality. So it's always going to violate something. And then even if it's not the Quran, but just natural revelation, general revelation, that still fails because, again, Allah would have to be the kind of being who would want to make himself known in different ways, but there's no sense in which there's different relations in Allah that are communicating in like these type of asymmetrical relationships, these like different ways of expression. Allah is not a multi-personal expressive God. Allah is Tawheed. He is one. So Allah would never will to make himself known because Allah doesn't see self-expression to another person as a good thing. Allah doesn't see it as a good thing to know and be known. There's no sense in which he ever sees that as important, but the Christian God sees that as important. Oh, you're still muted.
Oh, sorry, I'm saying, and he doesn't even possess that eternally in himself.
Yes, exactly. He can't. So he could not will self-expression, and he would not will self-expression either in the Quran or natural revelation, which also again a serious problem, because if Muslims go to the Quran, I would say, ooh, no. Allah would not will that, because that special revelation is personal revelation, right?
Yes.
Unlike general revelation, which is kind of at least distant, which still it wouldn't work. But besides general revelation, special revelation, which is personal self-revelation or self-expression of Allah to the angel Jibril and from Jibril to Muhammad, that's personal and directed communication. Allah didn't have personalized communication prior to creation. So
Yes.
Allah could not will that, and Allah would not will self-expression, which means Muslims should actually argue that they don't know if Allah exists. They should, because that's what Allah would want. He doesn't will
Yes.
self-expression. He doesn't will being known.
Again, I just want to let my viewers know that this is not a substitute to reading the book. I mean, the book is just full of games.
Yeah.
Please read it.
Yeah.
And as a conclusion to that, I just want to read what you have written in page 38. You say that the Quran, the very text meant to reveal Allah, becomes the evidence that Allah cannot reveal himself at all. The act of speech contradicts the silence of pure simplicity. The intelligibility of words contradicts the unintelligibility of an isolated monad. If Allah cannot will to be known without change, the Quran's descent is metaphysically impossible. If Allah does not will to be known, then his nature is not purely one, not purely simple, and not immutable. And you say that either Allah did not speak or he changed when he did, either Allah is unknowable or the Quran is not divine. The God who cannot know or be known is left in eternal solitude. And the worshipper who seeks him is left with a book whose existence refutes his own theology.
That's right.
In either case, Islam is false.
Yet again.
I mean, you really captured that well. Dilemma 8 to 9.
Yes.
The imperfect omniscience dilemma. What should Allah know?
Yes.
What should Allah know that he cannot?
Yeah.
Take us through this.
This is the fun one. Fun one. This one takes a little bit more. All right, this one does take a little bit more thought because it's about like omniscience. But the first two so the first one, dilemma 8. Could Allah know what it's like to be known, right? Could Allah know things like that? Could Allah have personal knowledge? So a lot of times different models of God say words like omniscience, but they kind of throw it around. They don't really define their terms too well. And that's not helpful for anyone, really. It's good to define your terms. So for Allah, we see what's supposed to be a maximally great being. A maximally great being. That Allah is the greatest kind of being that there could ever be, right? Well, here's the issue. If Allah is the greatest kind of being ever, and he's a personal being, then he should be the greatest kind of personal being ever. But the issue is this. Allah doesn't have the kind of knowledge that a personal being should have, because he doesn't actually have experiential knowledge, the knowledge that a person has, right? He doesn't have knowledge of what it's like to be loved, or he doesn't have knowledge of what it's like to be known by another person, or he doesn't have knowledge of what it's like to be in relationship to another thing. So besides all those different parts of the book where I talked about Allah has never been in relationship, this takes all of that previous info from the book and says, also, Allah wouldn't even know what that's like. Allah doesn't know what it's like to behold beauty. Allah doesn't even know what it's like to express oneself to another person. It's not just that he doesn't express himself, which is the previous argument. He doesn't even know what it's like to do that, right? So Allah doesn't know what it's like to express himself. He doesn't know what it's like to be in a relationship with somebody. Allah doesn't know what it's like to love or to be loved. So some people, when they read this chapter, they're like, well, isn't this the rest of the book from beforehand? I'm like, no. The rest of the book talked about his actions and his inabilities. This is talking about the fact that he doesn't even have the knowledge of those things, which violates his omniscience. And so we're not just talking about a God who is weak, which the rest of the book's arguing. Now we're talking about a God who is foolish or ignorant, right? this model of God is just ignorant. It's lacking knowledge that a perfect personal being should have. So Allah should know what it's like as a perfect personal being. He should have knowledge of what it's like to have personal knowledge, experiential knowledge. Not only does Allah not know what it's like to love, but he also doesn't know what it's like to experience love, to be loved, right? Not only does Allah not know what it's like to, make or to cause, right? Allah doesn't even know what that relationship would be like. So he's actually dependent on his creation for this type of new personal information, new personal relationship data. But I thought Allah was pure act, right? There's no perfections in his intelligence that he should be able to gain. Well, according to what we see in Dilemma 8 and 9, Allah actually, he could not know what it's like to be known or really to be in a personal relationship. So Allah's pure actuality is destroyed and his omniscience is destroyed, and in comparison to what you think a personal perfect being should have. So Allah could not know what it's like to be alone, to be, related, or to be known, or to be loved, or to be seen, or regarded, or anything. And so Allah doesn't know what that's like in that version of the dilemma. In the second omniscience dilemma is not only does he not know what it's like to be known, but he also just doesn't know what it's like to be loved or related. Now, technically, I know I only made one or like two dilemmas for this chapter, but you actually could turn every other single dilemma from the previous part of the book, and you could put all of those as their own dilemmas here. So, for instance, you could say a new dilemma for this chapter. That's why I say go into the book and see what I'm arguing, because while I say there's only like 1 to 2 dilemmas per chapter, each dilemma actually has multiple dilemmas inside of it. And so that's why it's really helpful to kind of read through it and think through it. You could say, all right, well, new dilemma. Allah doesn't know what it's like to be the cause of anything. Oh, well, then that means he's lacking the knowledge that a causal creator should know. Allah doesn't know what it's like to interact with anything. Oh, well, that means that Allah doesn't have the knowledge he needs in order for him to be the kind of miracle working God, right? So this chapter, it says dilemma 8 and 9, but it's more like dilemmas 16 and 17, because you can turn all of the previous dilemmas and then amplify them by saying he doesn't even have the knowledge of what that's like. So this dilemma goes a little bit further with his omniscience.
And when we were sharing it, I was just thinking to myself, don't you think that the doctrine of abrogation in Islam, in a sense, violates Allah's omniscience?
Oh, yes.
Because Allah gives a revelation, but he was not so sure when he gave it. And so next time he comes and says, no, forget about what I said. This is the best.
Yes. Oh, actually, there's a new dilemma in that too. Because that does mean that he's like gaining new information, or he's saying one part of his speech is more perfect than another. Wow, yeah, you're right. You could add another dilemma in there, right? Because you could say, yeah, Allah's speech has to be improved, which means Allah has an attribute, an eternal attribute that has to be improved over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Add that as a new chapter.
Yeah, that's a new chapter. You can add it on the second edition.
Yeah. Next time it'll end up saying like 20 paradoxes or something.
Yeah. And you remember to cite me on that.
Yes, I will. I'll make sure to have you quoted right from this video.
It's okay. Now we go to the last dilemma. That is the Quranic dilemma. This is sort of my favorite. You sort of alluded on it at the beginning of the video. But let us just get to it straight, Dave. Can Allah's word be changed?
Well, according to the Quran, no. But here's kind of nobody really knows, because the Quran says the eternal speech of Allah says that no eternal speech of Allah can be changed. Which means, since, as I mentioned in this chapter, I try to keep some references so people know exactly what I'm referencing here on this chapter. So the Quranic affirmation, the unavoidable witness, right? Just so Christians are able to pull this stuff up quickly in a conversation with a Muslim. Surah Al-Imran 3:3, he sent down upon you the book in truth, confirming what was before it, and he sent down the Torah and the gospel. So It was confirming what was before it. He sent down the Torah and the gospel. Now, this is important, just so Muslims listening understand this. The tafsir actually recognized this word here, sent down, as a phrase that's used and implied only with Allah's speech, right? So the tafsir actually say when the word sent down is used of the Quran, and then the word sent down is used of the gospel and the Torah, that means that both the gospel and the Torah are equally the same as the Quran in terms of being Allah's speech. So I have technically two different versions of this dilemma in this book. The Quranic Islamic dilemma says that the Quran over and over, here's the other verses, Surah Al-Ma'idah 546, and we caused Jesus, son of Mary, to follow in their footsteps, confirming what was before him of the Torah, and we gave him the gospel wherein was guidance and light. Just as the Quran says it is a guidance and a light, it says that the gospel is guidance and light, and the Torah is guidance and light. All of these are the speech of Allah, right? And say, O people of the book, you have no ground to stand upon until you uphold the Torah and the gospel and what has been sent down to you from your Lord. So Christians aren't even allowed to judge upon anything else. Christians are only allowed to judge upon the Torah and the gospel. Jews are only allowed to judge by the Torah according to the Quran, which means I'm only allowed to stand upon the Torah and the gospel. I'm not actually, I'm not supposed to stand upon anything else, which is weird though, because why would the Quran command me to stand upon a book that is corrupted? But again, no one can corrupt the words of Allah. And we see this quite a bit. And we see this again, Surah Al-Ma'idah, let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has sent down therein. And then as we go on, Surah Al-Kahf, 1827, one of the most important verses in this entire discussion. Please, Christians, try to memorize this one. And recite what has been revealed to you of the book of your Lord. None can change his words. None can change his words. What this means from all these verses is the Torah and the gospel were sent down by Allah to Moses and to Jesus, which means they are sent down as speech. They are his words, and no one can change his words. So whatever is applied to the Quran, the claims of the Quran made by Muslims today, we also can apply to the Bible and the Torah. So if a Muslim says the Quran has not had one letter changed since the time of Muhammad, which is nonsense, by the way, that's historically so wrong. But Muslims will say that. So then we would have to say, oh, because the speech of Allah can't be corrupted. And they would say, yes. And we would say, okay, then neither can the Bible have been corrupted either.
Absolutely. And you say this creates a central paradox. That is page 55. So if the Torah and the gospel are Allah's words, and if no one can change Allah's words, then the Muslim claim that these books were altered or lost is blasphemy against Allah's own immutability.
Mm-hmm.
The moment a Muslim says the Torah and the gospel have been corrupted, he is effectively saying the eternal speech of Allah has been defeated by man.
Yes.
That's not monotheism. That's metaphysical suicide. And when you read that, you feel like doing what Harvey says. You get up of your seat and then run around the house a little bit.
Yeah.
Because that is metaphysical suicide. And
yes.
And when I've been thinking about this issue of the Islamic dilemma, especially the Quranic dilemma that we just mentioned, I love linking it to the fact that Muslims do brag to us and tell us that Arabic is Allah's eternal language. You know, it is Allah's language. And so I always ask myself, okay, question number one, when Allah sent down the Torah, in what language did he send down the Torah? Right?
That's another
That
dilemma.
will be Hebrew, isn't it? And when he sent the Injil, in what language did he send down the Injil? That will be Greek.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But you tell us that Allah's language is Arabic. And we know, by the way, that Arabic as a language has actually developed, and it reached culmination by around the 8th century. Mm-hmm. So you are telling me that Allah's eternal language has been developing
over time.
Over time.
Yes.
That is another dilemma for you there.
Goodness. By the end of this, I might, actually, this reminds me. Different people on Instagram who have seen like some of the clips and moments from this book have actually made some extra dilemmas themselves.
Really?
And so if I compile all the ones you just made, and then compile all the ones they just made, and then compile the ones my students told me about, well, because some of my students in my classes got this book too, and they asked even more questions. I probably would end up, I really do think so, if I multiply all these dilemmas together, because a lot of these dilemmas can go based off each other. So then you get even more if you combine the two different dilemmas together. You probably could end up with around 40 or 50 different dilemmas if you actually added all the issues together. And those are just the theological dilemmas.
Please do a second edition. And
I will. I will.
I've also been thinking about historical dilemmas and scientific dilemmas.
Yes. Oh, okay.
So I can add a chapter or two.
Yeah, actually, okay. We'll see if we can collab so that the next one I can actually have you as a like a co-writer with me. So so you can actually add some extras, and I'll just put that for us, and I could send that out. That's a good idea. We'll work on that.
All right.
Because I don't have a section for scientific dilemmas yet. But something that I actually do want to say, because I know how Muslims are thinking as they listen to this. They're thinking, no. Parts of the Bible, parts of the gospel, parts of the Torah have been preserved, but the rest has been corrupted. I know that Muslims are thinking that. Now, number one, the Quran actually is very clear that it judges people for not taking or accepting all that's been revealed therein, right? Like, let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has sent down therein. So all that's been revealed. And again, Surah Al-Nam, none can change his words. If anybody says this, if anybody tries to go about this and tries to find a way around, then I would just go to the tafsir. Al-Jalayn on 3:3 affirms he revealed the Torah and the Gospel, both being the scriptures of Moses and Jesus, respectively. Ibn Kathir on 546 writes, we gave him the Gospel, which confirmed the Torah that came before it, and it was a light and a guidance for the righteous. And Al-Tabari agrees that both are divine books revealed from Allah, using the same language with divine speech appealed or applied to the Quran. So if a Muslim says that some parts of the Torah and the Gospel have been preserved, but then other parts have been corrupted, but the Quran has not been preserved, there's actually a theological Quranic Islamic dilemma. So the theological Quranic Islamic dilemma is kind of this last part here. And it's where we say, all right, is Allah able to will different things for his one attribute of speech? Mm-hmm. And of course, every Muslim philosopher would say, no, Allah can't will different ways for his attributes. Allah wills one way for his attributes. And I would say, yes, that's right. So if Allah can only will one way for his attributes, then that means that Allah's will is eternal and one, which is good because that's Tawheed. There's one eternal will. So Allah would not will for his attribute of speech anything other than one thing. It's preservation.
Absolutely.
So if Allah wills the perfect, uncorrupted, unedited preservation of the Quran, then Allah is theologically and metaphysically required to will the uncorrupted preservation, unedited preservation and authority of the gospel and the Torah. Like he's actually required to by his own theological requirements of his attribute of speech, his mutability, and the fact that his will for himself is one as well. Which means Muslims can't say that part of the gospel or part of the Torah have been lost, because that means that Allah wills differently for different things. I've spoken with a Muslim and they said, no. Because I said, well, if you say that the Torah and the gospel have been corrupted over time, then that means that the Quran could be corrupted over time too, because they're all Allah's speech. And the person said, no. Allah willed that the Quran would not be corrupted, but Allah didn't will that the Torah and the gospel would be preserved. He only willed that the Quran would be preserved. Now, you'll hear Muslims who say this. They'll say Allah wills the preservation of the Quran, not the previous books, the Torah and the gospel. But then I say that's a huge theological dilemma. You're saying Allah wills for his speech one thing, then wills the opposite for his speech at a different time, which means Allah changes his will regarding his own attribute of speech. That's insane.
It is insane. And actually, if a Muslim says that part of the Torah and the Injil were corrupted, you are essentially telling me that part of Allah's eternal speech been corrupted. It
Yeah.
doesn't make sense.
Yeah, especially because then Muslims were like, no, the perfect parts are still there. There's just corrupted words in between the perfect words. And I'll say, okay, so Allah's speech was overcome by man. Like a perfect attribute of Allah was able to be beaten by humans. That's wild. That means that Allah is actually not that strong. So then his omnipotence, I could have made an omnipotence dilemma. His
It's
omnipotence
crazy.
is really,
It's crazy because Allah sends down the Torah and the Injil
Hmm?
as gospel and guidance for mankind, and then He allows it to be corrupted. I mean, it doesn't really make sense.
yeah. It's not a light at all. It's a darkness, and it's not a guidance. It's a confusion.
It's a confusion. Thank you so much, Dave. I've really enjoyed this discussion, and I think it's good for us to end the discussion here.
To Christians straight from the Lord. Surah 10 says, ask the people who knew it before. But our gospel says Jesus is Lord.
I love that one.
It's so good. It is so good.
And the scriptures older than yours,
Amazing.
written down long before Muhammad's tours. So tell me, friend, what do you choose? If you pick both, then both you lose. If the gospel is true, the Quran is wrong. If it's false, then why does it play along? And if God's word can never be changed, who corrupted it?
Amen.
All right, Dave. Thank you so much, brother, for showing up in the stream, and for everyone who is watching. This is my brother David Suarez here. We've been talking about his book, The Death of Allah. Please be sure to check that book on Amazon. It is not expensive, by the way. Get the book, read for yourself. Drop in the comments there, ask questions, reach out, and let's talk. That will be great. So, Dave, what are your final words as we end the stream in style?
Well, I'd say one simple thing. Allah
Yes.
is dead, but Christ still lives.
Yes. Amen. Amen. God bless, brother.
God bless you too.
Can't praise the map, then toss out the way.